guys. Welcome to Power Hour. It's 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. 12 o'clock Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started. You may realize that I am not Laura Rogers. So Laura is letting me broadcast today to present this session to you, but she is in our Slack chat. And she'll be helping answering questions and stuff like that as we go through. And if you haven't joined our Slack channel yet, please do. The link should be in the description. I think it's iwmentor.slack.com, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, definitely go over there and ask to join. Laura will let you in, and then you'll be able to converse with us as we go through this session today. So Power Hour, just a little bit about it. I think a lot of people join it every week, but just in case you're new, Power Hour is something that we do every week on Wednesday at 12 Eastern, 11 Central. It is a SharePoint focused learning session, essentially. And we focus mostly on out-of-the-box solutions and things that we can do without code, and that kind of thing. So we do this pretty much every week. Sometimes we don't. We're a little too busy and aren't able to do it. But just check our YouTube channel, and you should see the upcoming broadcast, and that'll give you an idea when we're presenting. All right. So enough about that. Let's go ahead and get into the session today. And hopefully you guys can hear me. I'll keep checking the chat just to make sure that all of my technical things are working here. All right. And yeah, bear with me. This is this broadcast tool that Laura uses the first time I've used it, so hopefully I do everything correctly. But bear with me if things don't go perfectly. All right. So we basically what I want to talk about. A couple weeks ago, I did a session on managed metadata, and it was just kind of an intro session. So it was kind of a 101. How do you use the term store? Where do you create managed metadata? How do you work with managed metadata columns? And that kind of thing. So if you have not had a chance to watch that session and you are clueless as to what managed metadata is, then I would definitely recommend watching that before you watch this session, just because it's going to give you a pretty good intro, and I don't really go through that stuff in as much detail as I would do during that session. In this, I'm just going to kind of assume that you already have experience with the term store, you already know about managed metadata, and we're just kind of taking it to the next level. And so I call this one Boss Battle, because basically everything that we've learned, all the things that we can do with managed metadata, all the things that we can do, all the settings we can do in the term store, are basically going to apply it to this specific example scenario that I came up with. So that's what we're going to call it, Manage Metadata Boss Battle. Alrighty. So let's get started here. So what are we trying to do? Essentially, the example that I'm using is that we have a list of products for a company, and we want to display them on a dynamic page using managed metadata features. And you'll see a screenshot right there of kind of what we're going to end up with. And just full disclosure, this is already built. That's how you do demos. But we're going to kind of go through and see how I built it. And one of the things I will point out about this is that I am the person who makes things work, I'm not the one who makes things pretty. So this will just be very, very, very simple and basically just completely out of the box. There is a whole other level of this kind of thing where you can get into things like display templates and really, really make it look nice and customized to your company organization. But really, we're just going to keep it basic and just focus on how to get it to work. And then maybe we'll do a session down the road, or I think we actually have a session from our earlier Power Hours about display templates that might be helpful. So what you're seeing on the page here is essentially what we want to get to is instead of having to create, like let's say if we have all these different product categories, and instead of us having to go into site pages and create a page and put the web parts on it and do all the settings for every single one of those categories, which is what you would kind of normally do if you weren't relying on term-driven pages and the stuff that we're going to talk about today. We are actually just going to create one page with a few web parts on it, and then we are going to let manage metadata essentially do the rest. So we're going to use navigation and term-driven pages and a few other things to kind of make the rest of this happen. So we'll kind of go through it, hopefully step by step, and hopefully I have enough time. I haven't rehearsed the time on this specific presentation, but we'll see how much we can get through. So what are we using to do this? So like what are I like to always kind of go through this because there's with a solution like this, you're usually using different features inside of SharePoint to make it happen. So we are using, of course, managed metadata being the kind of the central focus of this whole solution. So we're using the actual term sets, we're using custom properties, we're using managed navigation and faceted navigation, and then also term-driven pages, which is kind of mentioned separately down here. So that's kind of the central focus of this. But of course we have to have a SharePoint list. So I need to have the data that I'm actually going to be displaying on these pages and the metadata for that data, all of that stuff in a SharePoint list. So we're going to have one of those, and I'll show that in just a second. Another thing that we're going to have to do is because really to make work with the search web part and the refinement web part and kind of make things work the way we want to on the page, I need to map these like crawled properties, which are your columns in your list, to what we call managed properties that I can use in these different web parts. And we're going to use the search schema to do that, and I'll talk through that in more detail. And then also I mentioned term-driven pages. That's a part of managed metadata. But we can actually create the page and then set it all up in the term store and then edit it and use it for multiple terms. The refinement panel web part, so that's another thing that we're going to use. This is what we're going to use to really show the faceted navigation. So we'll we'll get the settings right in the term store, but then we'll use the refinement panel web part to actually display that on the page. And then also we have the content search web part. A lot of people use this. You probably have used this even if you've never used managed metadata. It's very, very popular since with the release of SharePoint 2013. It became pretty popular. And basically we're just going to create a query that's going to rely on the managed metadata to show content. And then also the term property web part, just a really, really easy web part. You can create a custom property on a term in the term store and then display that information in this term property web part. So just something, it's very, very simple. And let me just check. I'm going to kind of switch back and forth just to make sure there's no big questions. Nope. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the site in just a second, but I wanted to kind of talk about the list. So we have a list here. Obviously, it has a bunch of products in it, their description, the product type, whether it's in this specific company, it's audio products versus visual products. We also have a product category, which is just a little bit more detail about the product, the price range, the sales team, and then an image of the product. And like I said, these things is just a demo, so it's kept very, very simple, but you could kind of get the idea of what can be done. In addition to that, what I'm going to show you is that in the term store, I have already created term sets for the product type, the product category, the price range, and I think even the sales team. And then what I've done is, once I created those term sets in the term store, I went ahead and created site columns, and then added that to this list, and started populating that information. And I'll just kind of talk through that when I switch over. And then also what I've done, and I mention it so that I didn't forget to mention it in the slide, is that I've added a custom property to some of the terms because I know that it's something that I'm going to want to display on the page. And in this example, it's actually the description of the product type. So what's the description of the audio group? What's the description of the visual group? And that'll make sense in just a second. So let's switch over there and take a look. Alright, so So here, the technologies list is the list that I am using to kind of generate all of this stuff. And as I mentioned here, I have a title, description, and then right here we have product type, product category, price range, and sales team. These are all managed metadata site columns that I've created. So if we go over to site settings and term store management, and you'll remember in my last session about managed metadata, we talked through this whole term store. So in the term store, I have product terms. This is just a group that I created so that I could easily find these. And then I have price range, product category, and technology type. So you'll see that under here, technology type, that's the audio and the visual. And then product category, I have all these different categories here. And then the price range here, I have that as well. So yeah, I just created those in the term store, just like I mentioned in the previous session. And then one of the additional things that I did is I added a custom property for the specific technology type. So if I click the term audio and I scroll over to here and I click custom properties, I just went in and added a property name called description, and I just typed that in. It wasn't something that already existed. I just can make it up as I go. And then the value. So here the shared property name is the description, and then the value is the audio team at Empowered has brought many cutting-edge technologies to market. So this is the reason that I did this is because I really wanted to, I have this dynamic page that I'm creating, but I wanted to have a nice description of this specific thing, which is the audio group. And so with the term property web part, you'll see a little bit later, I can dynamically bring those properties into the page without having to, sometimes you might, I know that I've seen in other kind of dynamic pages, people having to put a script editor web part that looks at something and then pulls some data in, and that can just get a little complicated. So this is the way to do it without code. So once again, that was custom property on the actual term itself. And you guys will see that in just a little bit. And then as I mentioned, if I go back over to the site, I created these as site columns. So if I go to my site settings and site columns, and I can't remember if I put these under custom, and of course I could search the page, but I'm not doing that. Yeah, so under custom here I have the product category, sales team, the price, and all of that stuff listed under here. So these are these are columns that I created, managed metadata columns that I created as site columns. And then I simply just went to my list and went to the list settings and added add from existing site columns, and then added those. And you can see there that they're the managed metadata ones. So once I do that, the reason that I like to do that as a site column is because it allows it to a little bit of an easier time when we get to this next part, which is the search schema and mapping this property or these columns to something that we can use in the web parts, like the search web part and the refinement web part. So that's one of the reasons I use site columns. Regular columns can work in that situation. It just makes a little bit, for me, it just seems like it's been a little bit easier using site columns. So that's kind of the general idea. Like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because the last session that I did covered like creating managed metadata columns and creating the term sets and all that stuff. But I just wanted you to kind of have a general idea of what I've done there. So now we can kind of move into the next part now that we have a kind of an idea of what the term sets are and what the content is. And I'll pause just for a second to check the chat. All right, looks like we're good. And of course, if you guys have any questions, put them in there and I will, unfortunately Laura's not on the line with me, so she can't ping me, but she might be able to do that through Skype, so we'll figure that out. But if you guys have questions, just put them in there and we'll definitely catch them before the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch back over to the presentation. And let's talk about the search schema. So search schema is something that we can access in site settings. So it's something that we can access in site settings, and basically it looks really complicated if you haven't been in there before, but the whole idea is that when we add content into a list or library, when we add the metadata in, search turns those essentially into crawled properties. So they basically crawl that content, and then the actual property, the column, is a crawled property. And for whatever reason, it's not automatically available to be to the refiners and to the search web parts. So what we have to do is take that crawled property and map it to what we call a managed property. And that managed property has a bunch of settings. It has the, can it be, is it a refinable, is it queryable, all that stuff. It has those settings. And so the whole idea is that once we do that, we can take those managed properties and now use them to do all kinds of cool stuff in the search web parts or in the refinement web parts. I'll talk about refinable strings in just a second because we're going to use those, but let me go through this slide really quick. So the frontal lobe, that's what I like to call it. So the search schema essentially controls how content is understood by the search index. What gets mapped? So SharePoint out of the box will map some of the default columns to manage properties. So your things like, let's say, the title field, obviously we know that's a pretty big default field inside of SharePoint, or the modified by or modified date. Those things are going to automatically be mapped to manage properties just because SharePoint's going to do that for you. But of course, if you're creating new things, those things will not automatically be mapped to manage properties, so you're probably going to have to do it yourself. And just as I mentioned on each side, you can see here crawled properties. This is all of the properties and metadata of an item. They'll become crawled properties. And then manage property. This is determine whether this one you map it to, and determine whether it's queryable, refinable, sortable, etc. And then manage properties. Basically, crawl properties are mapped to manage properties, so we can define how they are handled by the search index. And the final part of this, which is what I usually use, is that inside of the search schema, we have gotten all of these kind of blank managed properties. So there's just this whole list of blank managed property. There's strings, integers, dates, all of that kind of stuff. And what we can do is we can take our crawled properties, our site columns, if you will, and we can map them to these managed properties, to these refinable strings or dates or integers. And then we can use those inside of our site. And I like using the refinable strings just because sometimes I've had issues when I've tried to create a brand new managed property myself. I've just seen some weird stuff, and it's like normal SharePoint, right? Like it depends, and it can I could use a custom managed property one time and it works perfectly, and I use it in another environment and it doesn't work quite right. So I just have seen that the refinable strings are more reliable. And so you can do this also. Just one of the things that I get asked is, this mapping, the search schema mapping, it can happen at the global level, especially like in Office 365 where you have the search in the admin center. You can map stuff at that level, or you can map it at the site collection level. You just want to be careful, because if there are things that you need to map at the top level and have available globally, so these mappings are available to all site collections, then you probably just want to continue to use that top level, because what could happen is if you do that, let's say if I map, the first 3 refinable strings that are empty, and I do that at the top level, and then this other site collection over here, we map something to the 4th one, and then I go back, and now I'm going to go back to the top level. I'm not going to see that 4th mapping because it was done at the site collection, and if I try to do a mapping there, it's going to override it. That just gets a little funky. So I would say if you are going to do these mappings and you need them to be available globally, do them at that top level. If you don't see any of these mappings being needed globally, like let's say it's very siloed site collection, so this site collection has their own, this site collection has their own, there's no common ground, then you can do them at the site collection level. And I know that might be a little bit confusing, but once you kind of get in here, it'll make a little bit more sense. Alright, and before I demo the schema, let's just make sure there's no questions. Looks like no. And I actually probably should check YouTube too. I know people sometimes hop into YouTube. So I'll check that in just a few minutes. Alright. So to get to the search schema, we're going to go to Site Settings. And under Site Collection Administration, so that should give you an idea of what kind of permission you need to have. But under Site Collection Administration, we have the search schema. So I'm going to go ahead and click there. And this is I'm doing this at the site collection level because this is my demo tenant, and all of my site collections do different things, or different demos for things. So I'm doing it at the site collection level. But once again, you could go up to the admin center level and do this same thing there. The search schema is available at that level as well. So what we have here is you have managed properties, and you have a whole list of all the managed properties that exist. And one of the things you'll see, like I said, is like something like assign to. We know that it's a common task column that's just built into SharePoint, so that managed property already exists. And then we also have crawled properties. This is a lot bigger. This is essentially all the columns and all the things that are crawled inside of SharePoint. And then categories, to be honest, I haven't messed with that too much. I know that there are some uses for it, but I haven't messed with it too much, so I'll just skip it for now. So usually where I start out, like I said, I like to use the refinables. So usually where I start out is on the Manage Properties tab. And then I go ahead and I just go right to refinable string. So all of the things that I'm working with for this session or for this demo are just text or choice fields, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to use refinable string for those. So I'll show you if I type that in. You can see I type that quite frequently. And I hit this little green arrow. Then it brings me to this list, and this is what I was talking about. We have all of these refinable strings. Now, I have mapped like 7 different things here, but you can scroll down and you can see that we have a ton available to us of these refinable strings that we can use. And so this is kind of neat because the reason I like to use these is because all the settings are right for the content search web part and the refinement panel web part. I don't have to think very hard about what the managed property needs, the settings in the managed property if I was like creating a new one. Everything's already done. So all I have to do is just map my crawled property to one of these, and then I'm ready to use it. I will say though that once you do map it, you do want to. It's going to take a little bit to kind of pick up that information. So it's not like if you go in and map it and you immediately go over and try to use it, you might not. It may not work. But what you can do is you can go ahead and set the refinable string that you want to use in the query or in the refinement web part. You can set it. And then forget it. Isn't that like some famous chef's saying? But you can set it up and forget it. And once the search crawl runs, and once it kind of figures out what you've done, it'll automatically populate that information for you. So you can kind of set it up and just leave it and go back and check it maybe in a couple hours or so, depending on how long it takes for search to pick that information up. So, what I have mapped right here that you guys will see is that I have sales team, I have product type, product category, I even have the image. So, you remember back in my list there was the image of the product. So I've actually mapped that because I'm going to use that to display in my search web part. Price range, and then some other stuff down here that's probably for a different demo. So the way that these things are mapped is if I hover over the refinable string here, I could do edit and map property and click on that. And then if I scroll down here, I'll get to mapping. So I don't have to worry about the other settings like I mentioned because I'm using one of these refinable strings. Everything is the way I need it to be. So mappings to crawled properties, and you'll see that mine's already there, but if I want to add a mapping, I can. And yes, you can map multiple crawled properties to the same managed property. That has come in handy in other search-driven sites that I've built. And basically, this is your crawled property section, and then you basically just search for what you need. So if I type in sales and hit find, then I will see a couple of different options here. So this part can be a little tricky, and it's really trial and error, unfortunately. For most managed metadata columns, what I've found is that the OWS underscore is what works the best. There is also the OWS underscore tax ID. That's really the tax ID for the ID of the actual, kind of like the GUID for the actual term. So you don't really need that because you want to display the actual term. So for me, what I've seen is that the OWS underscore sales underscore blah 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 team, that tends to work the best for managed metadata. That's not always the case with every column. Some columns, it might just be the straight name of the column, like this one down here. Other ones, it might be something else. So sometimes it's a little trial and error. And usually what I'll do is I will map one, let it populate, look at it. If it doesn't work, I'll go back and map the other, and it can be a little frustrating. There may actually be some documentation out there on which ones work best, but what I've seen is, for the most part, the OWS underscore seems to work the best, but definitely check that out. So we'll go with that for now. So I would select that one and then click OK. And then that would add that mapping to this managed property. And like I said, you can add multiple. So if there was multiple things that I wanted to display through this managed property, then I could do that. So then also what I typically do, other than just the mapping, is I will give it an alias, just so that it makes it easier to identify. So right here, I just called this one region, because it was for, I think it was the sales region. And so what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So another thing about the crawled properties that might be helpful, and I think what we'll do is probably do like a whole other session on this, but there is actually a query tool that's available out there for SharePoint that you can kind of put like a fake query in and get a result back and look at all of these crawled properties and what their values are, and then you kind of get a better idea of the things that you should be mapping. So I think it will take too long to do it during this session, but I'll put that down with Laura, and maybe we could do a session on that. A developer I worked with previously, who was awesome and built like this amazing search-driven site, actually showed me that tool. And it's really, really cool and very useful, not even just with building stuff like this, but just kind of troubleshooting search in general. So yeah, we'll definitely go over that on one of our future sessions. I think that would be really good. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and just cancel this because that mapping already existed. And I'll type in refinable string again, just so we can review. And then I'm going to jot down really quick, because I always forget. I don't have a good memory. So I'm going to jot down really quick the ones that we're going to reference so that I can kind of point them out appropriately. So we have the product type is 01. Product type is 01. Product category is 02. And price range is 04. And the product image, just because I'm going to reference that in a little bit, that's 03. Okay. Just want to make sure I had that in front of me so we don't have to keep switching back and forth. Okay, so that's basically the search schema. The whole idea is you want to put your content into a list with, with your columns so that there's actual content for search to crawl. Then that column will become a crawled property, and then you can come into the search schema and map it. And the reason that you do that is because now we can use these refinable string properties here in these different web parts, and you'll get to see that in the kind of the second part of this session. So I'm going to go back to home for now, and I'll check the chat really quickly just to make sure we're not missing any questions? Nope. All right. Okay, so let's go back to the slide here. All right, so kind of the next step, I would say, I tried to do this in the most efficient order that I could think of. So hopefully this will kind of help the flow of this process make sense. But after we've kind of mapped, we got that stuff mapped, now what we want to do is go in and set the manage navigation settings and the term-driven page settings and all that stuff. We want to go ahead and set that up. And so manage navigation, it doesn't just have to be for the solution that I'm talking about. You can actually just use manage navigation just for your normal navigation. It's a taxonomy-driven navigation, so basically as you add terms to the term set where the navigation is, they get added to the navigation. And then another cool thing is that, what I thought was kind of neat, is that not only, with the regular navigation you have that top level, and then usually you have the drop down, and that's kind of like your sub-level. With manage navigation, you can even have another level underneath that, and it will automatically drop out and pull out to that third level. So that's kind of a neat thing. That's a neat feature. I've actually used that I had a customer that just had the request of having a third level of navigation in their global nav, and so I used manage navigation to do that. And all we did was just in the term set, as we're going to see, we just put in the links to the actual sites or pages that they wanted in their navigation. So it does not have to be this term-driven page thing that we're doing during this session. And what it does is for pages, it can give you friendly URLs. So as you can see in the example on the slide, you might have an intranet page that is intranet.com/sites/hr/pages/benefits.aspx. Kind of a long thing. Now granted, most of the time if we set up a good navigation, people aren't going to have to know the URL ever. But just in case, we could actually use the friendly URL in the manage navigation and do something like intranet.com/benefits. And it still goes, it's kind of like a redirect, right? It still goes to the same place, it just kind of gives that friendly URL. So they can use that and it's a little bit easier to remember. Alright, so we'll talk through that a little bit. I'll show you just kind of starting off how you can go in and turn on manage metadata navigation, and then we'll go into the actual term set that I'm using and kind of talk through some of the settings. So to kind of turn it on to begin with, we can go to our site settings and navigation. And then at the global level, I have manage navigation, so you can see it there. And then what I'm able to do is I'm able to go in and I can pick an existing term set. So that's what I did in this situation. I had an existing term set, the technologies term set, that I added as a part of the navigation. We can also create a term set. You can create a term set directly from here. So let's say if you're just turning this on for the first time and you want to go ahead and create the term set for it, you can do it right from here. And we can open the term store management tool and we can do it right from there as well. Create it there and get it set up from there. So basically the first step is kind of just switching it to manage navigation, and then you can kind of tell it which of the term sets that you're wanting to use. Some settings I'll point out down here. So add new pages to navigation automatically and create friendly URLs for new pages automatically. This is really, really cool. So right now in my example, I have under technologies, I have audio and I have visual. And let's say down the road in my list, they add in a new category. And let's say I'm trying to think of what else, audio, visual, I can't think. Of course, I'm totally drawing a blank. So we'll just say clothing. They're gonna do clothing now. So they have another category called clothing. All they have to do is they just add that clothing term to the term set, and then start populating that content into the list, the clothing content, And then what will happen is if I check those two settings, is it's automatically going to dynamically create the page and use all these web parts. So there's literally nothing I have to do to get it to display the way I want it. I basically just have to add that term to the term set and start populating the data in the list, and that's it. It does the rest for me. It creates the page, it puts the URL there, and all the content, the way that it's going to show up, it does automatically. So kind of a neat feature, and that's why a lot of people will turn to this for kind of product-driven sites and things like that. So then I can click OK, and we'll actually go over to the term store now and show you some of the settings. Actually, before I do that, let's take a quick look at the page that I'm using for this. And this is a big site, so it's probably buried somewhere in here, so excuse me while I go pull that out. Is it technologies? I think it is, hopefully. We'll find out. No, it doesn't look like it's that one. There it is. So what this is just the page I created, and basically it's just I think it's a wiki page that I created, and I put the content search web part on it. And typically what I would do is just when you create the page, you can leave it blank if you want to. And then once you plug it into the term store, and it creates this navigation, then you kind of you can go in there and create your content search query and your refinement stuff a little bit easier because you actually have the term in the URL now, and you can kind of drive things from that. So what I would probably recommend, you could definitely slap the web parts on here, but wait to configure them until you actually have the term set navigation set up. So we have the term property web part, that's the about our tech, the refinement, and then the content search web part, and you'll see that in more detail in just a second. So yeah, I just created one page. That's the thing with this. This is just one page, and I could have 15 things under here, but it's one page that's driving this whole thing. So created that page, and now we can go to the term store. And under navigation, and I did some other stuff in here, so we're just going to kind of pretend like it's just this technologies, because there's some other navigation going on for other demos. So here, technologies, these are the terms right here, if it expands. Audio and visual, these are the terms, the same terms that are being used in my product, I think, type term set, same terms, that are being tagged on the list. So as a new product's added, they tag it with if it's audio or visual, so same terms. But because it's in this navigation here, because I've set it in my put these terms into, or use this term set as my navigation, then I have these additional options over here. I have navigation, I have term-driven pages, faceted navigation, and of course the custom properties. So if I click navigation here, I can see the navigation, and actually let's use audio, because we'll see more from that. So I see the navigation node title is audio. I'm showing it in the global navigation. And then this right here, this navigation node type, if you just you didn't want to use these term-driven pages with all this fancy stuff, you just wanted like the link to the site for audio or the link to the page for audio, then all you do is just use simple link or header and paste in the link. And it could be something inside of SharePoint, it could be something outside of SharePoint, just depending on what you need in your navigation. And that's a real simple way of using managed navigation without all this extra fancy stuff I'm about to do. So once again, it's just under navigation, simple link or header, and just paste it in there, and then you're still using managed navigation and getting that option for that third level of nav, but you're just using simple links for that. In this example, we're using term-driven pages with friendly URLs. So when we make that selection, actually I do need to go up here, because that's where I set it. So when we make that selection, I get this extra tab here, and then basically what I'm doing is I have this configure the friendly URL. So that's where I'm saying it's just going to be /technologies, because I don't want it to be the /site/empowered /site pages.aspx abcxyz, whatever it usually says. So here under target page settings, then I basically check these two boxes, And what I'm doing here is I'm just pasting in the link to that page that I created. So once again, remember this is, and actually I think for this one we did a page for the top level and a page for the children, and that just, you can do different ones if they're needing to show different content for if they click on technologies versus if they click audio visual. But so yeah, I basically have the target page for this term, and then I also have the target page for children of this term. And I can set those pages. They can be the same page or they can be different pages just depending on what I need to do with them. And basically what happens is once I do this second one, change target page for children of this term, that page is then available now to audio, visual, and anything else that gets added here. And that's where this whole dynamic stuff starts happening. And I think I just saw a question, so give me 1 second. And I'll take a look. Let's see, it's sort of like the concept of cascading drop down with the term of children, right? It is a little bit like that. The only thing is that I guess what's different is just that like people are used to like I click this and then I only see the children that belong to it, that kind of thing. That you don't really get with managed metadata, but just seeing the tree structure, absolutely, yeah, it's definitely like that. And hopefully that makes sense, that answer. I'll come back in just a second. Alright, so that's basically where I put the page in for there. So that's that page I just created, that web part page. I just plug that in here. And then I can click save. We're going to come back and talk about faceted navigation in just a few minutes, but we won't do that right now. We'll come back to that. And then of course the custom properties, as I talked about earlier, for like audio, the description, and then visual has its description as well. So once I do that and click save, and kind of usually takes a refresh, what I should see is that term set is now in my navigation. So technologies, audio, and visual. And then when I click audio, if you look up here in the URL, we'll see /site/empowered/technologies/audio. So it's not the URL that this page was when we were looking at it in the site pages, because we're basically tricking it to think that this is the URL. And we're using that page as kind of our template. But what it's doing is, once again, like I mentioned, it's still just one page, one site page I've created. But then if I click between... Oops. My screen's freezing up on me. If I click between audio and visual... And now if I go to visual and look at that URL, technologies/visual. So it's automatically, because I have the settings I've done in the term store, it's automatically making that URL happen. Alright, so let's go back to the presentation. I think I kind of talked through that a little bit more. So term-driven pages, again, manage navigation settings. So once you turn that on, then you have that friendly URL we just talked about. So that's where I'm doing that /audio/visual. I set the target page, which is those are the first two ones. So we have a target page for the parent term, if you need it to be different, and then we have a target page for the children terms. So really it just depends on what you're doing. So you might want to have, maybe the parent term has a page with an extra web part on it or something, or extra stuff on it. Then you could set those two things differently. So the parent's one thing and then the children are something else. You'll also notice underneath that, I didn't really go into detail on it, but there's also the catalog stuff. So if you're building an actual product catalog using the product catalog site template, that's where that stuff comes into play. I just use the target page stuff for now because I'm not using product catalog. This is just one list that I'm displaying in a nice way, if you will. But if you are getting in a little bit more advanced with the product catalog, that's where those settings. And very similar, it has a target page and a page for children terms. So here, what you'll see in the term-driven pages setting, so audio, and then we see down here empowered/product/audio, and that's also what the friendly URL is. So that should give you an idea of where that URL comes from. Oopsie, oopsie. Alright, so now let's actually get into configuring those 3 web parts on that page. So one of the web parts is the first one we'll start with, is just a content search web part. We basically added that web part to the page and then go into the query builder, and we're going to do a couple things in the query builder to get it to pull back what we want it to pull back. And then also what I did is and you'll see here on the right hand side of this screenshot, the property mappings. As I mentioned earlier, I have that refinable string 03, which was my custom picture on my list. I just changed the picture URL and changed a couple other things there so that those things would display. It's kind of I would call it MacGyvery way of doing a display template, but of course you can also just do a full display template and make them look beautiful if you want to. But yeah, so let's take a look at the content search web part. One of the things that we'll kind of focus on is how does it know what, like it, if I click on it and it's /audio, how does the content search web part know that I'm on /audio and not on /visual? Like, how does it know that? So let's take a look at that. So here is the page. I think it's visual, so we'll just use that one. So once again, 3 web parts. There's the term property web part, the refinement web part, panel web part, and then the content search web part. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this page. And hit change query. So I'm using the advanced mode. You can use quick mode for a lot of content search web parts, but I like to use the advanced mode because I just like to get into it a little bit more. And really what I'm doing in this query down here is you'll see the path. I've just set that, I'm looking at this site, so the empowered site collection. And then the content type, that was something you can just do through here. So I can do content type contains or equals. And I think this one might have been called product. Of course, now I can't remember off the top of my head, so we'll just show you one. Yeah, product. So I basically did that and then hit add property filter, and that's where this whole content type GUID thing came from. So that's what I did that's what it did when I added that. So basically what that does is it just sets the query, right? So it just says, okay, I want to pull back everything that's a content type of product from this site. But how does it then go, all right, well, let me also look at that URL up at the top and see what the term is, and pull that back. So the way that I do that is I just went to this OWS tax ID metadata all tags info. It's a property filter that you usually will see. It's just kind of built in. I use that, which basically what it's doing is it's just looking at all of these items that I've queried that are coming back. It's looking at those items and it's saying anywhere in there does this specific thing exist, and that specific thing is right here under select value, site navigation term of current page. So SharePoint's doing the work for you. All you have to do is say, yep, just look at the site navigation term of the current page, which is going to be that /visual/audio, and does that word exist anywhere in the metadata for these items. And then what it will do is it will take that query of just all of the product items and it will narrow that query down and only show those that have that navigation term. So if I'm on the audio page, it only shows me the audio. If I'm on the visual page, it only shows me the visual. And that's kind of how you create that dynamic piece for the search web part. So basically all I'm doing is I'm just saying, hey, in all the metadata, does that navigation term exist? And then it will update the query, depending on which of the pages I've clicked on. That's pretty much it for the query. And then as I mentioned under property settings, the way I got this picture and stuff is I've just added the refinable string 03, which was that picture column that I mapped in the search schema. I just put that in here, and you'll notice that, of course, all your refinable strings and these drop-down lists here are available. So that's one of the reasons I use them, is because they're just automatically available. And that's how that picture is pulling in for the list. Because a lot of people, obviously there's I think some of the default settings here are publishing image and stuff like that. And that can be confusing if you're not pulling in, your query isn't pages, if it's list items. But that's kind of how you can achieve that to get that custom picture. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that for now, because we're not actually going to change it. Alright, I have 10 minutes, so let's get through the rest of this, and then I'll stop and look over some of the questions if there are any. So faceted navigation, this is also a setting in the term store on your navigation item. And basically what it does is it allows us to create refiners and add those to the page. And so we basically, because it's all dynamic, we create these refiners inside the term store, and then we just add a refinement web part to the page and tell it to look at the term store to kind of figure out what it needs to show. Normally, you could just, if you're not dealing with managed metadata, you could just, add a refinement web part and a search web part to any page, and then you could write in that refinement web part's properties, you could go in and adjust what you want it to show. But in this situation, we're actually letting the term store kind of drive that. And this can be quirky, especially as you're first creating it, because it's like I said, sometimes with some of this stuff you set it up, and then you kind of have to forget it for a little while as the search kind of figures out what you've done. So what I would suggest is just giving yourself, if you're going to do something like this, just give yourself a couple of days to set it up, test it, see what comes back, set it up, change it, test it, that kind of thing. Because what I noticed is that it took a couple days for everything to kind of show up the way I wanted it to after I was adjusting and tweaking it. But yeah, so we're going to go back to the term store, and we're going to go to the faceted navigation tab, and then we'll talk through that. So go back to my navigation. I'm going to go to technologies and then faceted. And so really what I've done here is, first of all, the inherit refiners. So basically what I'm saying is that I'm setting them at this parent level, technologies, and then I want all of these subpages to inherit these same refiners. So that's why that's selected. And then you can customize the refiners. And basically when I do that, anybody who's worked in the refinement web part probably has seen this page. So what I'm able to do is, right now it has the selection show only refiners with values. I can uncheck that to find what I need. So basically these are managed properties on the left hand side. And you'll remember I had refinable string 2, which was my product category. And I had refinable string 4, which was the price range. So those are the two things that I want to show right on the page, that they can, have this big list of products, they can click a specific category, they can click a specific price range. So I just basically went through, found those refinables, you can see there. I added them over to the right hand side, so you have 2 and you have 4. And then down here, I can do some additional settings. The alias, obviously, that kind of helps me identify which one. I can then do the sort direction, and if it's, can they do a multi-select in that refiner, so can they select multiple categories or just one? So I can set that stuff up there, and then sort by count and that kind of thing. And then also how many of the refiners show at one time. I can put that max and make that larger. So basically, all of this stuff that you're seeing, this little kind of builder here, this little pop-up dialog, you can do this in just a regular refinement panel web part. So if you're just using a regular refinement panel web part and adding it to a page, you'll get the same settings. But we're setting this up here in the term store. Let me click X. And then the reason that we're doing that is because we want it, once again, to be dynamic. So we set it up here, and then automatically any term, as if we add another term here, it gets a page, and it has this stuff all set up for it. We don't have to go in and do anything. So let me go back over to the page. Actually, before I do that, let me go to my presentation. And this is just a slide a little bit about the refinement web part, and we're going to see that in a second. So like I said, the Choose Refiners button, when you add it, that looks just like that screen I was just on. So that's really how you would set up your custom refiners if you wanted to do that. And then also we have, what it looks like. That's just the out of the box result type author and modify date. That's just how it comes out of the box. And then you'll also notice that the setting up here, and I'm going to show this on the page in a second, this use the refinement configuration defined in the managed navigation term set. That's the selection I make in the situation that I'm going through. So if I click down here, and we should see those properties pop up. Then really all I did for this, I added a refinement web part to the page, and then I just selected use the refinement configuration. And it looks at these technologies and the /visual and all that stuff, and it figures it out from there because I've set that faceted navigation in the term store. So I click that option, click OK, and voila, there it is. So that's ready to go. It pulls in that stuff automatically. I will mention that now, like a year, maybe a year and a half ago, when I was first kind of figuring this stuff out, the product category, the titles here, product category and cost, didn't pull in. They just said refinable string, blah blah blah. But then at some point they started pulling in, and I don't mean like a few days. I mean like 6 months later. So one of the things I used to say was a gotcha is that you might have to do like a script editor on the page to update those. But this script editor does something else, so it's not that. So I'm not sure really what happened. Maybe it's just something that they updated. I am using Office 365 here, but just something to keep in mind with the actual. And that's not something that applies to like a regular refinement web part, but definitely with the faceted navigation, it was kind of a weird gotcha. But anyway, seems to be okay now. Alright, one more web part, really quick. I have that custom property on my term. It is called description. Literally, all I have to do is go to web part. My screen's a little slow. Not web part properties, come on. Insert. Now it's just being slow. Alright, hold on. Alright, this web part right here, about our tech. I just went to web part. I'm just going to show you which one it is so that you guys are familiar. And I think it's under content rollup, which is also where content search is. There's a term property web part. I added that. And then also just so you guys know, the refinement here, that's under search, under refinement. Just want to point that out in case you are new to that. So I added that to the page, and then all I had to do, very easy, I gave it a title, so I wanted it to always say about our tech as the title. And then I said use the page context term, once again, looks at audio or visual, /audio/visual. And then I said render property, custom property, description. So as you remember in the term store earlier, I went into custom properties, added description, and put in that description. So that's all I did here, is I'm just saying whatever, look at the page term, whatever description it has, render that on the page. And that's how I'm dynamically showing the description for visual versus the description for audio, with still, like I said, one page. So let's go ahead and click OK. And we'll stop publishing this guy. Or stop editing, I apologize. And so once again, so if I click audio, I have the audio team at Empowered, blah, 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 with the audio categories, the audio cost stuff, and then the audio, these are actually the audio products over here. And if I click visual, the visual team at Empowered is blah, 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 blah. That's the visual description, visual categories, visual costs, and the visual technologies. They have a little bit less. But once again, the coolest thing about this is that those two things you just saw are the same page. Literally the same page. So I could continue to add terms and have different things here in this list, different categories, and it just automatically pull in the way I needed it to. All right, literally 1 minute. Let me just make sure I have nothing left here. That's just about the term property web part, which we talked about. And I think that's it. All right, so let me go look and see if there are any questions. All right. I think Laura's been doing a good job of getting those things answered. One thing I will say that I thought of as we were going through is that modern pages. So now you could definitely use the modern look for your list in this situation. Absolutely, shouldn't be no problem. However, the page itself, you can't use a modern page because it doesn't have the content search or anything available to it. And also, I think some of those other web parts like the refinement and the term property, those things aren't available to the modern pages right now. So you would have to use a classic page for this specific part. So just something to keep in mind for now. You know, they're changing or adding to those modern pages often, so we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, totally can use modern view for your list and everything, but the actual page for right now probably will just have to be your classic page, wiki page or web part page. Laura said, yeah, hashtag awkward for modern pages. That's so true. Alright, guys, well, hope you had a good time. I'll jump into Slack and just continue to answer questions as you come up with them. I think we have another session next week. I probably should have checked before I said that. But hopefully we do. I think we do. Yeah, I think I saw one. And then as I mentioned, I probably will do one on that query tool, the search query tool for SharePoint. It's really neat, so I'll get with Laura and get that on the calendar as well. All right, thank you so much. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you soon.